All right, everybody, and welcome back to the Steel City Blitz Steelers Podcast, presented by Deck Roofing Incorporated of South Florida. It has been a couple weeks. We hope everybody's well, and of course, the NFL stuff is kind of slow right now. We're not into the official dead period, but it might as well be because there's not a whole lot of stuff going on. I don't know how ESPN does it every morning. They consistently talk about the same thing every day, pretty much since the end of March, but be that as it may. We got a number of things to dive into Steelers-wise tonight, and joining me to do that will, of course, is Ian and Ben. And gentlemen, I hope that you are both well on this fine late spring evening here in June. We're not quite to summer yet, although many parts of the country feeling like it. Ian, how are things in the Steel City tonight?
Things are pretty good. The state of Pennsylvania actually today just released some new guidelines for sports organizations. So all the way from youth sports up to professional sports. So it's been an interesting day. I read through them this morning, and they do have some guidelines for having games and having practices. So as far as what we're concerned, professional sports, basically they're allowed to have practices and play in the current or in the quote unquote yellow phase. So Pennsylvania has this red, yellow, green kind of thing. So Allegheny County, where Pittsburgh is in the green phase right now. Some other counties around the state are still in yellow. So in yellow, you're allowed to practice. In green, you're allowed to play, and you're allowed to have up to 250 people present on site during a game of any type without having to submit a plan to the state for approval. But they also had this. Ian? No, this is professional.
This is pro.
Yeah. 250?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. 250 people present without submitting a plan. Now, they also include this clause: professional sports organizations that want to play or practice with more than 250 people on site or directly outside must submit a plan to the Department of Health for approval. So, in theory, the Steelers, which have an outside stadium, could submit a plan to the Department of Health and get approval to have more than 250 people on site. Like I said, these regulations were just released this morning. So, everyone's still kind of trying to figure out what they all mean. There's a lot of kind of deference to the CDC guidelines, things like that. But there's also a lot of weight, even at the lower levels with like youth sports, collegiate sports, amateur sports. A lot of weight is put on the sports organization. Coaches and staff have to do a lot of things. Whatever the sponsor, whether it's like a little league organization or a youth football or whatever, has to put together the plan and have it approved and all that. So a lot of weight is put on the leagues and the coaches themselves to kind of administer things. But we'll see where it goes, and it's another step, closer towards having football again. They essentially have approval to have games, maybe not with fans at this point, but they have approval to have games. So that's another step in the right direction.
And it's important to get that information. And like we were talking before we started recording, is the fact that so many people do come from outside of PA to come in for games and stuff. And if they aren't aware of what the Pennsylvania state laws are, that could impact things. Obviously, the Steelers do a pretty good job of getting the message out there via social media and stuff about what's going on and what's not. But still, it is obviously important to know. Ben, you're obviously out on the opposite side of the country and things, and hopefully things are going well with you, I assume, out there. Looked like a nice day in Portland.
Yeah, it was a great day. It was fantastic. Let's talk some football.
Yes, let's do it. The Steelers, of course, announced, and I guess some ways forced to announce, because the NFL told all 32 teams that they were not going to be doing training camps anywhere other than their facilities this year. So that put an end to a 53-year run at St. Vincent College in Latrobe. And You guys have been there multiple times. I've been there multiple times for training camp, and I absolutely do feel for those that had trips planned this year. It is an amazing thing if you're a Steeler fan. But, now there's talk about some of this being done at Heinz Field, Ben. I mean, we know what it looks like in Latrobe. Heinz Field does not look anything like Latrobe in terms of the amenities and the things that players and coaches need to do. So what do you think this is going to look like?
In terms of space, and that's the issue. You only have one field, obviously, at Heinz Field. In Latrobe, they have 4. They have 3 grass fields, and they have 1 turf field that they can practice on, depending on what the conditions are. And they can spread out. They can run drills on all the fields, some of the fields, one of the fields, whatever, So it just gives them a lot more space to work on. I tend to believe what's going to happen is they'll do some scrimmages at Heinz that the fans can attend. Obviously won't be able to interact with the players as they've done in previous years, but they'll be able to watch, which for the fans, so that'll be cool. And they're not going to be able to go to the facility and watch practice like they can when it's at St. Vincent. So I just think the Steelers are trying to throw them a bone, basically, and just say, hey, we're going to try and practice here regularly or semi-regularly and scrimmage so you guys can watch it. Now, they've got limitations on how long they can make guys practice, how many days per week, etc. But they have more space at the facility than they do at Heinz Field. As well, they have things like meeting rooms. I mean, I'm sure they could take spaces in Heinz Field and they could convert them to meeting rooms very easily if they wanted to. But there's also a requirement from the league that states that the teams are required to have position meetings and unit meetings, like the whole offense or the whole defense, meet outside as often as possible. In order to lower the risk, for transmission of this virus. Now, the flip side of that is like we were talking about before this all started. Is these guys, when they practice and when they play, are going to be right up against one another, and spit will be flying, and not intentionally, but spit will be flying, and there'll be a lot of heavy breathing, and I don't know how you avoid transmitting a virus under those circumstances, but they're going to do what they can do to protect the players regardless and still try and put a product on the field. So, we'll kind of see how this all works out. I don't know.
I think, first of all, I think it's great that Ian has offered up his skybox as one of the meeting areas there in Heinz Field. Very noble of you. Ian, what is the over at the facility? Many fans are very, very aware of what is at the Steelers facility away from Heinz Field, but as Ben alluded to, that seems to me to be a much better place to hold a training camp. What are there, 3 fields over there, I think, plus some other stuff?
Yeah, they've got a whole bunch of stuff, especially. And the other thing they're going to have to kind of figure out, too, is they share that facility with the University of Pittsburgh. So I'm not really sure what the plan is for college football this year. I don't think that's really been said at this point, but, they're going to have to figure out, kind of limiting the number of people within the facility at any given time, the number of, just people between classrooms, training rooms, all that kind of stuff. And there's 4 football fields down there there's one of sort of pits that Pitt usually uses, I'll say more typically, and, 3 other grass ones that the Steelers typically use, but there are 4. They're not full-size fields, I don't think, but they're fields.
Yeah, and it is very unique what the Steelers have. Are there any other pro teams that have such a relationship where they have a college team with them? I don't think so.
I'm not sure. And then they do share Heinz Field with Pitt too, don't forget. So, I mean, their usage of Heinz Field is going to depend on when Pitt's using it as well. So, but at the rate Major League Baseball is going, maybe they'll just practice at PNC Park, because who the heck knows if the Pirates are going to play. And if they do play, it might be more entertaining to watch the Steelers practice there than watch the Pirates play an actual game.
That's an excellent point. Excellent.
But the one point I'll bring up with the sort of limited practice space is, the Steelers do have the one practice every year at Latrobe Memorial Stadium. So they sort of have a plan and a workout, I'll say, quote unquote, already in place for how they do it when they're all in one stadium for a practice on one night. But I don't think they could do that kind of consistently over time. It's really hard to have, field goal kickers and punters practicing things that take a lot of distance, and receivers running routes that take a lot of distance, kind of all in the same field. It's easy to do kind of your backs on backers, your lineman drills, just go to a corner of the end zone, line up a couple guys and go. That's a little bit easier in a limited amount of space than your drills, installing your playbook that actually, you need to spread guys out across the whole field to do. Yeah.
And if you're not, 100%, into football to the point where you understand what goes on at camp and stuff, they break the positions up, and the position groups go off, and you could have corners working one field with safeties and stuff, and you might have linebackers working in another place and so on. And it is very, very difficult to do that in just that 100-yard area. So I'm fascinated to see what they do. It's going to be unique for everybody. This is all kind of by the seat of your pants type thing as we all kind of go through this thing together. And the pro sports leagues obviously are no different. So Ben, did you have any final thoughts on camp there before we move on?
Nah, not really. I think I'm just kind of in wait and see mode like everyone else to kind of see how this is going to unfold. And hopefully the guys can get work in. It's a shame that the fans won't be able to interact with them like they usually do, but they just can't this year, and we're just going to have to deal with it and accept the fact that at least we're getting football.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I look at it too. I'm just glad the discussion is getting closer and closer to actually being on the field, and can't wait till it actually happens. Ian, go ahead and close out this topic here, if you would.
Yeah. So 2 final comments. One, there was a story that came out today that the NFL was potentially exploring decreasing the number of preseason games. Yeah. So that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing is the Steelers are kind of going to be the test case for how this whole preseason practice works, because we're playing in the Hall of Fame game, which means we get to go to training camp a week earlier than everybody else except the Cowboys, who are also playing in the Hall of Fame game. So, kind of depending on how the Steelers and the Cowboys go for that first couple weeks of training camp, we'll be back into kind of regular practice mode at the facility while other teams are still in their quote unquote training camps, although this year it might not look that much different. But that is one kind of advantage of playing in that Hall of Fame game, is you get to start your training camp and practices a little bit earlier. So given how the situation is this year, that means that the Steelers and the Cowboys now get to be the guinea pigs for the league for how well their virus policy works.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I had heard the thing about possibly shortening preseason, and I had totally forgot about the fact that, we and the Cowboys will be starting a week ahead of everybody else. So we'll be the Petri dish, if you will. Guys, I think one of the worst kept secrets in all of Pittsburgh is that Cam Heyward is at some point going to get an extension. He's entering the final year of his contract. He's 31 years old. He has been a tremendous Steeler. I think that goes without saying. Had a great year last year, despite not having Stephon Tuitt most of the season, next to him. And we've obviously, as we do all the time, have batted this back and forth about what it would look like. But Ben, what is a potential extension looking like for Cam Heyward?
I think you're looking at, honestly, 4 years, $17 million per in new money. That's kind of where the market is right now. It kind of that, I don't want to call it a second here because that makes Cam sound like he's a second tier lineman. But you got Aaron Donald making $23 million. Okay,
Yeah,
he's
that's
viewed
a
as a
top
game
tier.
changer.
Yeah.
DeForest Buckner makes 21. I don't think Buckner's worth 21 personally,
I don't
but
either.
obviously the Colts do. They gave him the money.
Mhm.
He's 26 years old. He's a young player. Maybe that was what it was going to take to keep him from jumping into free agency. Donald's 29. But after that, you've got Fletcher Cox, Grady Jarrett, and J.J. Watt. They're all about $17 million per. So my guess is, since Fletcher Cox is making $17.1 per year, that Cam's deal will come in about $17,150 per year in new money, which is not cheap, but it will lower his cap hit this year, 2020. And, it may not lower it much, but it'll lower it some. It'll give them a little bit of room to maybe do some other deals. You've got Juju entering the last year of his deal. It wouldn't shock me if he went into the year without a deal. You've got Bud Dupree going into the last year of his deal. Obviously, you got a handful of other guys that are free agents that they want to look at trying to potentially do extensions with.
Right.
And that would help a little bit. There are other ways they can create some space if they want to. They've also got to bear in mind, they've also got to take into consideration that the cap could actually go down next year because revenues could be hit by the number of fans not in the stands this year, and a number of other factors. So the cap could go down, and they've got to plan for that accordingly. There are going to be some difficult decisions to make going forward, not trying to put themselves too far over in 2021. So it's anybody's guess right now, but Cam is definitely a guy. If I'm the Steelers, I absolutely do that deal. He's been an upstanding guy. From an off the field standpoint, he's an excellent player. He's consistent as hell. It's just, he's a great leader in your locker room. That's a guy you want around, you want to keep. And I don't see them letting him walk. I really don't. And that's kind of what it's going to take. Everybody needs to chill out a little bit, though. It's June. They've only been back. They've only been back in the facility for a little over 2 weeks. They haven't even signed the damn draft class yet. Okay, they're busy. They'll get to Cam. Don't worry about it. Everybody needs to friggin' relax.
Ian, when you look at Javon Hargrave, who of course now is across the state in Philadelphia, roughly $14 million. I mean, when you see that, does that just automatically in your mind mean, well, if he's making that, then Cam has to make more than that? I mean, is that just a guaranteed for you?
Yeah, I think that's the floor for Heyward. Ben talked about what the ceiling is. I think that's the floor for Cam is. Stephon Tuitt's deal is around $12 million a year. Hargrave got 13 to 14 in that range from Philly. Granted, Philly plays a 4-3. We're playing a 3-4. It's a little bit different, but it's. I think you kind of have to compare Heyward with the interior linemen, whether you're talking defensive tackles or in a 4-3 or defensive ends in a 3-4. That's kind of the point of comparison. The one thing I'm going to slightly disagree with Ben on is J.J. Watt's only getting like 16.8 million a year. Granted, his deal, like Fletcher Cox's deal, was for like $100 million. And he signed it, a few years ago too. So
that's
Watt was the top of the market when he got it, but still.
Yeah. He signed his deal in 2017.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So that's the thing you got to bear in mind when you look at that and say, okay, here's what he's making now. I just don't think it has any bearing right now, especially when you've got guys like Cox making 17.
Yeah. So in that range is probably likely. But I'm probably looking more around 16, which I know is semantic, 16 versus 17, but but over a four-year deal or so, that does equal some money. The one thing I'll say is, Heyward was 30 years old last year. He's going to be 31 this year. So I wouldn't sign him to anything after his age 35 season. So that means you're looking at probably a 3 to 4 year extension on top of this year.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be stunned if it goes beyond that. I think. Do you view, Ian? You mentioned $16 million. Do you view that $1 million as the classic hometown discount? Could he ask for 17?
He could ask for whatever he wanted. I mean, you know, like Ben said, he's a leader in the locker room. He's one of those guys that you want to have as a Steeler for life, and you know, the team would do good by him by, you know, taking care of him for one final contract. You know, his last deal was, I think, like $53 million about total.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if they do another deal at somewhere around, you know, 4 years, $16 million, again, you're probably, you know, looking at, that's a $64 million deal. So you get him up over $100 million for his career. So that's and as we've talked about before, you know, guys that the Steelers signed to these contracts, I know they don't guarantee anything other than the signing bonus. So basically nothing after the first year, but guys have a tendency to make basically all the money that they're, you know, 75 to 80% of the money that they usually are offered in a contract. It's very rare that a guy makes like less than 50% of the money he's offered in a contract from the Steelers.
Yeah, very, very true. And as we segue along here, just a reminder that you're listening to the Steel City Blitz Steelers podcast presented by Deck Roofing Incorporated of South Florida, serving Broward County and the Southern Palm Beach counties, whether it's commercial, residential, multifamily, or condos. Contact Deck Roofing today by visiting deckroofing.com. Let's stay with the defensive line here for a little bit, Ben. I think when we look back on Stephon Tuitt and the fact that they got him in the second round, there was a lot of discussion that, you know, he was potentially a first-round guy. And, you know, when he's been healthy, he has flashed some pretty damn good play. But it's the old question of can he stay healthy? And, you know, how good do you think this line could be if he and Heyward stay healthy up front?
If Tuitt can manage to stay healthy, he will completely mitigate the loss of Javon Hargrave. Completely. And I realize that Hargrave plays nose tackle or did. Right. And, you know, the bulk of Tuitt's snaps come at either end or interior defensive line. But the Steelers only play a 5-man front, which is the 34.
Right.
The nose tackle, maybe 27% of the time last year, and it goes down more every season.
Every year, yeah.
Because it's a passing league. So, you know, it's just not that important. That guy just isn't that important at the nose, especially on running downs where, frankly, Hargrave wasn't very good. Where he excelled was on passing downs, penetrating and creating havoc that way. So if Tuitt can stay healthy, he will completely mitigate the loss of Hargrave. You know, I can't put it any plainer. Right. The question is, can he? I think Tuitt is, if he's not the most talented player on that defense, he's damn close to being the most talented player on the defense. The issue has just been his availability. Yeah. He's not been available for 16 games in a year but his rookie season. And that is an issue. He's also had some issues, you know, with injury that cut back on his effectiveness when he did play. At least he did play, but he wasn't as effective as a result of those injuries. And things like that, you know, over time, they impact your value to the team. It's certainly not his fault. I'm not trying to make that case.
No,
I'm
for
just
sure.
saying, you know, this is what it is.
And Ian, I would ask you, given the amount of money that Tuitt is making, is there a certain amount of pressure on him? I mean, it's a rhetorical question in a way, but does he have a little bit more pressure on him than, say, other guys would in similar situations?
I mean, I think there's absolutely pressure. The one point I'll make is that given the number of restructurings the Steelers have done with him, increasingly difficult to move on from his contract. So Ben's absolutely right that, he's a fantastic player when he's on the field, but he's just hasn't been available for them lately. So, the old sort of truism of your best ability is your availability, that, Tuitt hasn't been available. But at the same time, they can't cut him this year, obviously.
No.
And actually, from a cap perspective, cutting him this year would increase their cap instead of decrease it. But even looking to next year, I mean, he's set to count almost $15 million against the cap, and they'd only save about $3 million by cutting him. So, the thing we talked about with Vance McDonald this year, right? The sort of opportunity cost of, you can't get a guy for what you would save that can replicate what he can do, so you got to pay him whatever you're going to pay him, is basically kind of where they are with Tuitt for the next 2 years. That they gave him money, and he's performed like a guy who deserves that contract when he's on the field. He just hasn't been on the field. I mean, can you imagine the way Tuitt started last year if he'd been on the field the entire rest of the season? I mean, this defense this year has the potential to be better than last year's was, even though they lost Hargrave.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you.
If they can all stay healthy. But yeah.
Right. Well, we know that's always the big if. But, and speaking of that, let me just address the depth on the defensive line. Tyson Alalu has been a very solid signing. I think he's been a spot starter. He has played really important minutes at times as a reserve. In his 30s now, of course. I think he's been solid. But when you get past that, they traded for Chris Wormley. We really don't know what the plan is. I mean, Ben, do you find it interesting that he's listed as a nose tackle on the roster at all? I guess I didn't see him as that at first.
I do not see him as a nose tackle at all.
Yeah.
So I do find it interesting. I'm kind of wondering how they're going to use him. I don't pay a lot of attention to where players are listed at this point, though.
True.
I kind of let things play out through the course of the preseason and see where, ultimately where the coaches put them and how they play them, how they're utilized. And then I kind of, make judgments based upon that.
Sure.
I found it odd for certain, but was it last year? It escapes me.
You thinking of somebody in particular?
Yeah. They moved Marcus Allen to strong safety on the depth chart last year in the preseason, and they never played him there. That was something else. Anyway, yeah, well, there's an example. I mean, Marcus Allen was supposed to be a strong safety going into linebacker.
That's right.
He's supposed to be a strong safety and a linebacker going into the preseason, and they played him at free safety the whole preseason. So it's like, why even pay attention to it until you actually see what they do with the guy?
Yeah. Well, to me, it's just curious. Much in the same way a lot of coaches will, especially at high school and college levels, they'll beef up a guy's weight or his height just to make it look better. You wonder why they position these guys in rosters the ways that they do. Because Wormley just doesn't strike me as a nose by any sort of the imagination. But again,
he's too long. He's too tall.
Yeah, exactly. Very long guy. So I don't know.
He's high waisted. He's not a guy you typically put at the nose that is stout at the point of attack.
Right.
He's a penetrating interior defensive lineman.
Yeah,
so
I don't know. Was his role in Michigan. That's why I was, I had a little bit of familiarity with him because of that. But I just immediately, and Ian, before you start with your smack talk, I don't need any of that tonight.
Who said I was going to smack talk Michigan?
Well, I stupidly brought up Michigan, so I figured out, Ian's just sitting there like a devil on my shoulder, calculating what he can come up with to slam Michigan. Not that it wouldn't be totally deserved, but I digress.
The one little thing that concerned me a little bit after they traded for Wormley was his age. It's not that he's real old. I just didn't realize in his third, he's got 3 years behind him. He's already 27. It's like, why? Okay, well, I mean, you burned a 5 on a guy who's not going to get you. He's only got 1 year left on his contract. That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one of those guys they want to try to extend, maybe, and maybe not. That's a guy you want to look at least, see how he fits in your system, and then maybe extend him if he really fits well. But you're not going to have a whole lot of time to do that because they don't negotiate deals during the season. But yeah, I don't see him. I mean, he's 300 pounds, but he's 6'5".
Yeah, I mean, you if you haven't seen Chris Wormley, you just have to watch him on tape. You have to see him. I mean, he does not look anything like a nose tackle. Trust me.
Nah.
Casey Hampton is not worried. Let's put it that way. I mean, he doesn't look anything like Casey Hampton. Guys, there's two more subjects I want to talk about before we depart for the evening. And the first of which I find to be of the utmost importance, and that is that apparently the Ben Roethlisberger Twitter feed is going to unblock everyone that they've blocked. And I don't know about you guys, but I have lost sleep over this.
You're so full of shit.
It just cracks me up. Pro Football Talk did an article on this. I mean, really? That's what an article is worthy of these days?
They've done at least a dozen other articles about how Ben blocks people. I mean,
touche. Yeah.
That's one of the things that people hate about bloggers is all of the nonsensical BS articles they write because they need to generate content. Anyway,
we're not getting rich here at Steel City Blitz, so we're not putting that kind of crap out.
I suggest, Mark, that you educate Aaron on the use of both the mute button and the mute conversation function, because it isn't so much the people that are mean, because she can mute them right away.
Yeah,
it's the people that are going to respond to the people that are mean and the ongoing conversations and the long threads it's going to generate when everybody gets unblocked. I would point that out to her and just send her some screenshots.
Oh, she knows. Trust me.
Oh, good.
we had a nice conversation. Now, Ian, I would be very remiss if I didn't mention some of your thoughts earlier today.
So,
at the idea of Ben actually reading, Ben Roethlisberger reading the Twitter feed. I'll let you take it from there.
I will lead off with, I will be stunned if Ben actually reads his Twitter feed, which I fully expect that he will not do.
No.
That being said, we know that Ben has heard criticism of his play in the past from local media outlets and made snide comments about said criticism in post-game interviews, saying things like, oh, maybe I should retire, or, oh, I guess this old man still has it after he put up like 6 touchdowns on, was it the Ravens a couple years ago?
Ravens once.
It was 5 touchdowns on the Ravens.
5 touchdowns, yeah. And that was kind of after that Jacksonville game when, people were like, oh, maybe he's washed up and should retire. And then he went out and did that. And he was like, oh, maybe the old man still got something. So, he's definitely heard criticism, but it's just kind of hilarious to me if he would go into a post-game press conference and be just reading basically those Saturday Night Live segments where people read tweets, like hate tweets about themselves. If he's like, well, this person said this, so I went out and threw 2 touchdowns for that, and this person said this, and made sure James Conner got his 100 yards, and this person thinks we should trade Juju, and we got Juju $150 and 2 touchdowns, and he won't do it, but the mental image of
it's comical.
A snide, sarcastic Ben coming out and just calling people out is pretty hilarious.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. On a more serious note, you guys alluded to the fact that a lot of contractual stuff going on, and Juju enters the final year of his contract, and is it possible, Ben, that Deontay Johnson has a massive year, because he had a pretty damn good year his rookie season, and then we find out that he was pretty much playing hurt most of the season too, which made it that much more amazing, quite frankly. You know, what kind of year do you think he has, just as we sit here in June, of course?
I think it's more than possible. I think it's likely that he has a really good year. He runs routes so well.
He does.
He creates separation so naturally, so easily, that I think he ends up having a big year. And I'm not saying he's going to lead the team in yardage or receptions, but because it's a marathon, and Juju also really excels at the slot, where he's going one-on-one against a nickelback or a linebacker, and they're going to play him. Obviously, most of his snaps in the slot this year, unless they've got two wide receivers in the field, in which case he'll line up on the outside. But I just think he's going to do an awful lot of damage in the slot, especially early in the season. And then when Deontay kind of establishes a foothold and a rapport with Ben, toward the end of the year, it would not shock me at all if it is very evident that he is the number one receiver in December.
Well, we saw what Juju could do when there was a lot of attention on AB, and maybe the same thing happens there. Ian, what do you view in terms of Deontay Johnson at this early stage?
Yeah, so, I mean, everything Ben said's right. I'll also add that Johnson led the team in targets last year. Take that for what it's worth, but he had 92 targets. James Washington was second with 80, and Juju was third with 70.
With terrible quarterbacks.
Very terrible.
Terrible quarterbacks, right. But, even with terrible quarterback play, we talked a lot about Mason Rudolph was waiting for guys to be college open right before he threw the ball. He wasn't throwing guys open. And for Deontay Johnson to lead the team in targets also means that he's getting open. So that's a very good sign. The other thing I'll add is that the year before, when Ben Roethlisberger was fully healthy, with both Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster in the lineup, they both had over 160 targets each. So consider that you went from 2018, where your top two receivers both had 160 plus targets, to 2019, where Deontay Johnson had 92 as your top one and James Washington had 80 as your second one. Just imagine another, maybe they don't throw the ball as much with Ben coming back from elbow surgery. Maybe they try and run the ball more, but nevertheless, just imagine another 100 to 150 targets thrown around the field for, Johnson, Washington, Juju, Connor out of the backfield, Vance, Claypool, Ebron. Like, when you start to think, like, how are there going to be enough balls for these guys? Like, you have to realize, there weren't that many passes thrown last year. And part of that was they couldn't sustain drives. They couldn't pick up third downs. So when you're going 3 and out or getting one first down and punting, then you just don't have as many offensive plays during games. And that was one of the things that, really hindered the offense last year, was they went 3 and out so much early in the game that they never got into a rhythm. So then when they had to put a drive together, it was exceedingly difficult for them because they just weren't in sync with each other. And the target numbers bear that out. The play numbers bear that out. I mean, the quarterback play we've talked about ad nauseum, but just having Ben back there and able to pick up third downs and continue drives is going to create a lot more opportunities for people as well. You figure, maybe that's another carry or two for a running back. Maybe that's another target or two for a couple guys. So, just converting one third down creates a lot more opportunities too.
And it also makes the defense better because they're not going to be on the field as long.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And, I also wanted to mention real quick, I don't know if you guys saw this today, but Ian, you mentioned Chase Claypool. Now this is a guy that's about 6'3", 230 pounds. Did you happen to see him doing the back handsprings and cartwheels and stuff?
I did, yes.
I mean, first of all, I think I pulled a hammy just watching it, but that's pretty impressive for a guy that size. To do all that, quite frankly. Maybe I'm easily impressed. I don't know. But I was pretty impressed by it. That's a big dude doing some really, really athletic stuff there. Anyway, guys, as always, it was great to get back with you, and we'll definitely become more regular now as we get going, and perhaps pull a few interviews in here once in a while. Of course, I know the crowd's bantering for Ellie to come back on, but she's busy cooking tonight. I don't know if you guys. Yeah, if you follow her, Ellie, on social media, she was busy cooking, I think, for her dad or something, and her 2 dogs were watching quite enviously. I think enviously is a word. If it's not, I just made it up. In any case, yeah, so we'll have a few more guests coming down the pike, but we will now depart for this evening, and for Ben and Ian, this is Steel Dads signing off on the Steel City Blitz Steelers Podcast presented by Deck Roofing Incorporated of South Florida. And hey, go Steelers.
Ravens suck.